What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. It's about that time once again to talk about The Land Before Time. I have been slowly covering this series with my buddy Mike of Did You See That, and it's been a lot of fun to do. Whether the films have been fantastic or not, this is a franchise that I am very nostalgic for when it comes to the first few installments, and seeing a lot of these films for the very first time while spending time with characters that I am nostalgic for has been a fun ride, even if some of the films have been fairly mediocre and formulaic. Today we're talking about the 10th film in that said franchise, and this one is called The Land Before Time 10, The Great Longneck Migration. We're going back to 2003 for a film once again directed by Charles Grosvenor. It stars once again people like John Ingle, Kenneth Mars, Aria Noel Gerson, Rob Paulson, and many of the other returning cast members, but also most notably stars a new Littlefoot in this film played by Alec Medlock and Keifer Sutherland as the character of Braun. Before we get too far into this, I'd like to say a big thanks to my buddy Mike of Did You See That for joining me once again in another one of these videos. Always a pleasure to talk about movies with Mike, and it's been just a pleasure talking about this series that I'm nostalgic for, but has been a complete first-time watch all around for him, and a lot of these have been first-time watches for me as well. There are 14 films in this franchise altogether, which is what inspired me to take the dive into this. We're now on the 10th one with 4 more to go. The Great Longneck Migration, or as the movie starts off and some of the posters say, just the Great Migration. They must have added the long neck version in some of the, follow-up releases of this film. Really focuses wholly on the character of Littlefoot, who this time around is played by Alec Medlock. In the previous chunk of films, he was played by Thomas Dekker, and while there have been some actors who have changed over the course of time, Littlefoot has been played by Thomas Dekker for majority of the films in this franchise. So it was a little sad to see that in this film, specifically because of the events of this film, that they did change voice actors. Now, Thomas Dekker very likely probably was starting to age out of the role. His voice was probably starting to get a little bit deeper like it was in the previous film, and that's likely why they wanted to do that. Though I feel like one of the things these films absolutely should have done at this point is age up the characters. There are 14 installments in this franchise, and similar to a lot of other cartoons, I guess, they keep the characters all at the same age throughout the entirety of the runtime of this series. And I think that aging them up over the course of 14 films would have easily made for far more enjoyable stories where we could have seen our characters mature and change in drastic ways. But this is, for me, arguably maybe the best sequel since the original film. The original film is a classic, charming film of its time that had some great names attached to it like George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Kathleen Kennedy, James Horner, and so many more. And when it comes to the subsequent sequels, it's been really hit or miss. A lot of times my enjoyment simply coming from my attachment to these characters on a nostalgic level. Here we are now with the 10th film in the franchise, and finally I could say that I think this is a really good sequel in comparison to the other ones. Now, as an overall film, it's still fairly formulaic when it comes to the Land Before Time series, and there's a lot about this movie that isn't necessarily incredible, but I found myself enjoying this one far more than the last few that I've watched, completely being gripped by the story and finding myself kind of emotional at points. And I think I really have to give credit to the fact that this is just a storyline and some things that happen here that we would have liked to have seen a lot sooner, but also just goes to show the potential that this series has had for far more rich storytelling, and especially when it comes to family. Now, of course, like all the other films, the movie opens up, we're reintroduced to Littlefoot, Sarah, Petrie, Spike, and Ducky, and the rest of the dinosaurs in the Great Valley. You have Littlefoot's grandparents, you got Sarah's dad, and the rest of the gang. And not too long into the film, Littlefoot, as well as all of the other long-necked dinosaurs, start to have these visions, these dreams that are kind of all calling them to migrate to one certain direction. They don't necessarily know where they're going or why they're going somewhere, but they know they all need to kind of come together. This ends up leading Littlefoot from leaving the rest of the group, going on this adventure with his grandparents, where they end up meeting tons of other Longnecks. Throughout the journey, they end up discovering that the reason they're going to this place is because of some myth that the Longnecks believe from the past, where the sun came crashing down on the earth, creating a crater, and the Longnecks helped save the earth by pushing the sun back. Now, we end up learning by the time we get to the end of the film that all that happens is an eclipse, which causes the Longnecks to go migrate somewhere else. It's a weird, very simplistic, kind of overdrawn thing in this film, or overblown thing, I should say, but for the most part, it makes sense within the mentalities of the Longnecks, at least for what they set up in the movie. As far as the rest of the gang, Sarah, Ducky, Spike, and Petrie, they all decide after a while, after all the Longnecks have left, to actually follow behind Littlefoot just to make sure he's okay, just getting themselves into some trouble, honestly, as they try to catch up to Littlefoot and the other Longnecks, eventually running into an older Longneck themselves, who ends up leading them to the rest of the Longnecks along with Littlefoot. But where the heart of this film actually lies is in when Littlefoot finds a very specific Longneck who actually turns out to be his father.
Your grandma and I wondered where you had gotten to. Ron?
Papa Longneck.
Littlefoot? This is your father.
We end up finding this character named Braun, played by Keifer Sutherland, which completely shocked me that he was even in one of these films. And he actually explains why he hasn't been around, where he's been this entire time, and how he ended up losing connection with Littlefoot and his mother.
Where were you all this time? Where were you?
Oh, Littlefoot. Your mother and I knew we were going to have a hatchling. You see, we wanted to raise you in a safe place. So before you were even an egg, I went off to find a new home for all of us. When I got back, the earth shakes had changed everything. It took me so long to find where the nest had been, and nothing was left but a crack in the earth, as deep as a mountain is high. As I searched for your mother, and the young one I knew had been born, the great circle rose and fell many times, but I couldn't find you anywhere.
And without a doubt, this was something that completely gripped me emotionally. It really surprised my fiance and I as we've been watching these movies, and they've, been very formulaic and they've been very safe. More often than not, the base premise of every single film in this franchise after the first one has been there's some challenge for the dinosaurs in the Great Valley, whether it be their food source, maybe it be a weather condition, maybe they get separated, and the kids find a way to work together and save the day while the parents stand around bitching and moaning and wondering where the kids all ran off to. And in this case, you have a different story. You have Littlefoot going off on this adventure with all these Longnecks, learning more about his kind, learning more about who he is, and most notably being reunited with his father and having this opportunity now to grow and connect to his dad. And now his dad is the leader of this new group of Longnecks that he found along the way. And by the time we get to the end of the film, Littlefoot has to make the decision on if he's going to go back to the Great Valley with his grandparents, who have raised him since his mother's passing in the original film, or if he's going to actually go now on an adventure with his dad, along with all of the other Longneck dinosaurs, live with his dad now. And that's the base premise of this movie. I got some more things I want to say on the film and what I liked and what I didn't like throughout this journey. But before we do that, let's go ahead and toss it on over to Mike of Did You See That? And then we'll get into my final thoughts on this movie.
Hey Perez and everyone over on Anthony's channel, what's going on? My name's Mike from the channel Did You See That, and I've been collabing with Anthony on the last 9 installments of the Land Before Time series. So firstly, Anthony, thank you for having me back once again to talk about the 10th installment into this franchise, which is crazy that we're actually finally onto this number. But this one is called The Great Longneck Migration, and Before going into this one, I actually heard from a couple of people saying that this one is actually meant to be a pretty good sequel. So definitely my interest was piqued just knowing that information to start with. And then after actually checking out the movie, which I'm not going to go too much into the plot or cast, I'm sure Anthony's probably already covered all that good stuff as normal. What I can only say about this is definitely, got elements that I really enjoyed, and I think there's aspects here that I think are better than some of the other sequels. Heck, this could be the best sequel so far, but it has got some big negatives. So just a couple of positives from me right away is I love the fact that this is more of a Littlefoot and his kind of grandpa story, and this whole Longneck migration, as the title suggests, and just the fact that the story feels different to what we've seen before. This time it's not so much about Littlefoot and just his friends purely going on an adventure. The adults have no clue where they are and they go looking for them. This time Littlefoot actually goes along with some of the adults, and all these Longnecks kind of come together, which is crazy to see how many there actually is in this whole universe, so to say. And there's kind of a purpose as to why they're going there to an extent, but also there's definitely a huge message throughout around family, and that aspect I really enjoyed, and I felt like it was finally great to get some answers about Littlefoot's family as he meets his dad here, and we also see his mum in a flashback. So those elements I really enjoyed, and I think wholeheartedly if the movie stuck with that storyline precisely and that only, dense this down from say 84 minutes to maybe about 70 or maybe 65 even, this would have been probably maybe on par or maybe just slightly less than that first original movie, because those aspects I really enjoyed. I was invested. I was like, wow, okay, we're finally doing something a little bit different, and this is what I've wanted to see, and I can only kind of commend the director for doing that. The negatives for me is purely the fact that this movie is called The Great Longneck Migration, but they have to include Littlefoot's friends, and purely the friends are absolutely useless in this movie, except from bringing the villain over to where all these Longnecks are migrating to. And I just felt like this was just an absolute throw-in and shoehorn moment throughout the movie, and really took me out of those moments that I was really invested in, because this movie should have just purely been about Littlefoot, his grandpa, meeting all these other Longnecks and meeting his dad. That alone is an absolute solid story and something completely different, but his friends have to come along for the ride later on in the movie. They then have to bring a villain along later on in the movie just to have a villain in this movie, so to say, once again. And those parts where his friends are in this movie drag the pace down completely, taking him about 40 minutes or so just to even get to this migration area for the Longnecks, which it should have really been there in about 20-25 minutes, so to say. And I felt like because they dragged that part out so much, it really hurt the pace of the movie. I didn't feel like his friends really needed to be in the movie, except for maybe the beginning scene and maybe like a reunion scene right at the end, and that would be it. And that for me, I felt like would have done this movie a lot of justice, but because they go with that route, it really dampened the movie for me, which is a shame, because besides that, this would have been a great movie. So yeah, Anthony, love to know your thoughts on this. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Anthony A. Perez, but thank you once again, man, for having me on, and I look forward to the next installment.
A big thanks to Mike of Did You See That for joining me once again here on the channel for another The Land Before Time review. We have 4 more films, my friend, 4 more films. It has been a journey. It's been tons of fun, but I'm honestly looking forward to wrapping up this series, putting it behind us, and just looking back proudly and fondly at all these videos we've done. You guys can find the link to my buddy Mike down below in the description box, so go give him some love, let him know I sent you. But for now, let's go ahead and get into my final thoughts on the movie. I'm happy to hear that Mike actually really enjoyed this film on a lot of levels, but I do agree with a lot of the criticisms that Mike does have when it comes to this film. And the most notable one, without a doubt, is the group of friends here. Sarah, Ducky, Spike, and Petrie decide to follow behind Littlefoot and the rest of the Longnecks to end up catching up. And the pacing of the film does sometimes just kind of drag when we get back to them, because while they are cute characters, while I do enjoy seeing them, except Sarah, because she's terrible and she's a really just bitch of a character still 10 movies deep, I really enjoy spending time with them, but it does feel like they just kind of had to be included. You know, there's really no reason for their characters to be included here. This is a personal tale for Littlefoot, and I feel like because he is the central character in this franchise overall, honing in specifically on him and his whole situation with his father in this film would have easily made for the far better film. I don't necessarily hate the fact that they included the rest of the characters here, but similar to what Mike said, I do agree with the fact that after they meet this older long-necked dinosaur, them being involved in the story only really led to some of the sharp-toothed dinosaurs, the T-Rex characters, ending up following them to where the rest of the long necks are, leading to a moment where all the long-necked dinosaurs, including this older gentleman that's been with the rest of the gang, Braun, Littlefoot's father, and Littlefoot's grandpa, working all together to fight them off to protect the rest of the long necks as well as the rest of the kids. And for the most part, it's a nice ending. It does have that traditional The Land Before Time feel to it, but yeah, you know, I think where the heart of this movie really resides in, and the thing I enjoyed the most, the thing that surprised my fiance and I the most while watching it, was the review of Littlefoot's father. It actually made me emotional because while these films haven't been fantastic in a lot of ways and have been fairly formulaic, I do love the character of Littlefoot. I do love these characters. We've spent a decent amount of time with them at this point watching all of these movies, and even if the journeys haven't all been overly exciting and incredibly well written, they're all really nice, precious, lovable characters. So to see something like this dramatic kind of turn in their story happening, I really enjoyed that about this. It actually gave me some chills once I actually saw Grandpa say, "Littlefoot, this is your father." And once he explained what happened and we can reconnect to the events of the original film, I genuinely started to feel a little chills, and I was actually surprised that I was feeling these emotions watching the 10th installment of The Land Before Time. And I hope with the last 4 films here that we could do a little bit more of this. Bring back some returning characters, tie into these characters personally. Am I expecting a grand finale by the time we get to the 14th film? No, but honestly, I just really hope that they do more of what they did in this film. If I could feel for the journey of these characters that I do enjoy, then I feel like it's only going to make a lot of these last few films a lot stronger. I genuinely wish they would bring The Land Before Time back with a 15th film, kind of wrapping it up with all of these kids being grown up now, having their own kids. Put a nice bow on top, a little cherry on top, whatever you want to say, and just wrap up the story with some emotionality. When it comes to the whole element that has to do with Littlefoot's father here, again, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the time spent with him, getting to know his father. I really enjoyed him also recognizing that his dad's not only a father figure to him right now, but there's also young, unhomed, don't have a family long necks that are part of this group, that are part of this big group of long necks that his dad leads, that look to him as a father figure, most notably a young green long neck dinosaur whose name escapes me right now and my dumbass didn't write it down in the notes. But this young long neck actually really looks up to Braun as his father, as he's the only one who has not been adopted by any of the other adults within their long neck community. And I like that Littlefoot at first, is kind of annoyed by this kid, but ultimately recognizes that he's got family and his grandparents, and he chooses to go back with his grandparents and his friends to the Great Valley because that's where he's been, that's where his family is, that's where his home is. Not only does he need his grandparents, but they need him, and I really just loved that moment. It gave some sense of maturity to the character of Littlefoot and some sense of growth. But most notably, what I really enjoyed about that scene was not only him saying, "Listen, I'm going to go back with my grandparents. I know we just met for the first time after all these years, after being separated, and you don't want to lose me, Dad, but I need to be with my grandparents and my friends who I love and who I see every day and who they need me just as much as I need them." But he also tells his dad, "Listen, while you are my dad, there are other young dinosaurs here that look to you as their dad as well, most notably that young green long neck dinosaur." And I thought that was really mature of the character of Littlefoot. I really felt like I grew with his character. And I just wish that Thomas Dekker, who had played Littlefoot all the way up to this point for majority of the films, would have had the opportunity to play Littlefoot again in this film specifically. I feel like even if his voice had started to age out a little bit, it would have made the character feel a little bit older, and I feel like you know, he had been through a journey with the character already, playing him in all those previous films, that this was the film I feel he really deserved to be able to shine when it came to the voice acting for the character of Littlefoot. So if you can't already tell, I really enjoyed The Land Before Time 10, The Longneck Migration. I found it to be definitely one of the more emotional films in the franchise. Does it still have those formulaic things, some pacing issues, and some unnecessary storylines like some of the previous films? Absolutely. Is this a 5-star film? Not by any stretch of the imagination, and I wouldn't say it's anywhere close to as good or charming as that original film, but I do feel like after watching 9 films since that original film, it's nice to have a sequel like this that I actually found myself emotionally attached to. I almost wish that each of these films had some sort of emotional core the same way that this film does. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. A big thanks to you guys for watching. I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say down below. And like I said before, you guys can go to the description box down below and give my buddy Mike some love. Go check out his channel. Go subscribe to his channel. Let him know I sent you. And as usual, a big thanks to all of you guys for watching yet another video in this franchise. I look forward to covering the last 4 films, and I'll see you guys in those next 4 films. And I'll see you guys in those next 4 videos, as well as all the other videos I'm doing here on the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.